Somewhere out there, right now, there's a narcissist sitting in a silence they didn't choose, and it's driving them out of their mind. Not because they miss you, let's get that out of the way immediately, because it's the first lie they've ridged. The first lie they'll try to tell you, if they ever get the chance. It's not you they can't stop thinking about. It's the outcome. It's the fact that, for once, in a story they have spent years writing, directing, and starring in, someone else wrote the final page, and they didn't get a say in it. They didn't get to spin it, reframe it, delay it, or talk their way out of it. It happened. It's done. And now they have to live inside a decision that was made without their permission, without their approval, and without their input. And for a narcissist, that is one of the most unbearable experiences a human being can have. Today we're going deep into why that is. Why the ending of a relationship with a narcissist often becomes more devastating to them than it ever was to you. And why the silence you've created is doing something to them that years of arguments never could. Stick with me until the end, because there's a specific psychological mechanism at play here. One most people have felt but never had a name for, and once you understand it, you will never look at a narcissist's post-breakup behavior the same way again. Let's start with something that sounds almost contradictory at first. Narcissists don't actually fear losing you. What they fear, at a level so deep it barely registers as a conscious thought, is losing control of the narrative. Throughout the entire relationship, whatever role you played in their life, partner, friend, family member, employee, you were never really seen as a separate, fully autonomous person, with your own inner world and your own right to make decisions that affect your own life. You were, in ways that are uncomfortable to say out loud, a character in their story, a supporting character, sometimes an important one, sometimes even the love interest, but always someone whose script was ultimately being written by them. And as long as you were in that role, they had a sense, conscious or not, that they could edit you. They could rewrite the ending whenever they wanted. They could apologize their way back in, charm their way back in, guilt their way back in, and often that worked, because that's exactly how the relationship survived, as long as it did. But then something happened that they didn't plan for. You closed the book. And here's the part that breaks something in them. You didn't just close it. You closed it while they were still mid-sentence. This is the piece almost nobody talks about when they discuss narcissistic reactions to breakups or estrangement or being cut off. Everyone focuses on the anger, the smear campaigns, the sudden flood of "I've changed" messages, the love bombing that resurfaces the moment they sense you slipping away. But underneath all of that noise is something quieter and far more destabilizing for them. The horror of an ending they did not author. Because a narcissist's entire sense of self is built, brick by brick, on being the one who determines how things go. Not just in big dramatic moments, but in the tiny, invisible negotiations of daily life. Who apologizes first? Who gets the last word? Who decides when a conversation is over? When you finally end things, on your terms, in your timing, using your words, you take the pen out of their hand in the one story where they always assumed they'd be holding it until the very last page. And this is why the silence afterward is so uniquely torturous for them. Silence, to most people, is simply the absence of communication. But to a narcissist, silence is the absence of control. It's a locked door they cannot pick, a stage they're no longer allowed on, a conversation happening entirely inside your head that they have zero access to and zero ability to influence. They cannot charm silence. They cannot manipulate silence. They cannot gaslight silence into questioning itself. Silence simply exists, indifferent to their performance. And that indifference is the thing that unravels them, because their entire self-concept depends on being reacted to, being important enough to provoke a response. When you stop responding, you're not just withholding communication, you are, in their internal experience, withholding their proof of significance. Now let's talk about something specific, something that happens almost every single time a narcissist finally has to sit with the finality of a decision you made. It's the return of the final conversation, except it's never actually final for them. They will reach out, sometimes weeks later, sometimes months. Sometimes with a message so carefully worded it almost sounds therapeutic, full of phrases like, "I just need closure," or I think we deserve one honest conversation. Or, I'm not trying to get back together, I just want to understand. And on the surface, this looks like growth. It looks like maturity. It looks like the kind of accountability you spent the entire relationship begging for and never received. But watch closely, because what's actually happening underneath that message is not a search for understanding. It's a search for re-entry. It's an attempt to reopen a door that was closed, not because they miss the relationship as it was, but because the closed door itself is the thing they cannot tolerate. They are not trying to come back to you. They are trying to come back to being the author. And here's where it gets even more revealing. Because if you actually give them that conversation, if you agree to sit down and talk it through one more time, watch what happens to the tone the moment they realize your decision hasn't changed. The mask, which had been so carefully arranged into something soft and reflective, slips almost instantly. Suddenly you're cold. Suddenly you're the one who never really loved them the way they loved you. Suddenly this whole closure conversation was apparently your idea, not theirs. And you're the one being difficult for holding your boundary. This whiplash isn't random. It's the panic of someone watching the story slip permanently out of their hands, scrambling for any version of the ending where they still get to be the one who decides how it might. Rich. There's a specific kind of disbelief that settles into a narcissist when a decision truly, finally sticks. It's not sadness in the way most people experience sadness after a loss. It's something closer to disorientation, the psychological equivalent of reaching for a step that isn't there. Because their entire operating model of relationships has always included an escape hatch, a reset button, a way back in if they push the right buttons or wait long enough or perform enough remorse. And when that escape hatch simply doesn't exist anymore, when you don't reopen the door no matter how convincing the knock sounds, something in their internal logic breaks down. They genuinely cannot process it. Not because they lack intelligence, but because the entire architecture of how they've survived every previous relationship has depended on the assumption that endings are negotiable if you're persistent enough, charming enough, or patient enough. And this is exactly why so many people who have finally, truly walked away from a narcissist describe the aftermath in almost identical terms. The frantic messages, the sudden nostalgia for a version of the relationship that conveniently forgets every too painful moment, the attempts to recruit mutual friends or family members as messengers, as if enough external pressure might finally reopen the door that logic alone couldn't. What none of them understand, in that moment, is that they are not witnessing your weakness. They are witnessing the one thing a narcissist has never had to face before. They are witnessing the one thing a narcissist has never had to face before, an ending that holds, no matter what performance follows it. Let's sit with that for a second, because it matters. Most people, when they think about why it's so hard to walk away from a narcissist, focus entirely on the manipulation tactics used to keep you in the relationship. But almost nobody talks about what happens on the other side of that equation. What happens inside the narcissist when those tactics stop working? Because for the first time, possibly the first time in their entire adult life, they are being forced to experience a consequence they cannot talk, charm, or manufacture their way out of. And a person whose entire identity has been built around never truly facing consequences does not have the internal architecture to process one when it finally arrives. This is not a metaphor. This is, quite literally, what's happening in that disorientation. They are encountering a wall where there has only ever been a door. So let's talk about what actually happens next, because it usually unfolds in a very specific, almost predictable sequence, and once you see it laid out, you'll probably recognize it instantly from your own experience, or from someone else's story that sounded eerily familiar to yours. The first stage is disbelief disguised as confidence. This is the phase where they act like nothing has really changed, like your silence is simply a phase you'll grow out of, like the relationship is on pause rather than over. They might post as if everything is fine. They might mention you casually to mutual friends, as if you're simply going through something, rather than having made a deliberate, final choice. This isn't calm. This is denial wearing a calm costume, because acknowledging the finality out loud would mean acknowledging that the story ended without their consent, and that's not something they're ready to do yet. The second stage is when disbelief starts cracking, and this is where the messages usually begin. Not angry ones, not yet. These are the soft ones, the reflective ones, the ones engineered to sound like growth. I've had a lot of time to think. I'm not the same person I was. I just want you to know, I understand why you left. These messages can be incredibly convincing, especially if you spent years hoping to hear exactly these words from them. But notice the timing. These messages almost never arrive while things were falling apart, when the words would have actually mattered. They arrive after the silence has stretched long enough to become unbearable for them, which tells you everything about what's actually motivating the message. It's not remorse arriving late. It's discomfort arriving on schedule. The third stage, if the silence continues to hold, is where things get sharper. This is when the narrative starts to shift, sometimes gradually, sometimes all at once. Suddenly, in conversations with mutual friends, in vague social media posts, in offhand comments dropped strategically to people who they know will report back to you, the story starts to change. You become unstable, ungrateful, cold. Someone who changed or who was never really who I thought they were. This isn't really about convincing you of anything anymore, because by this stage they usually suspect you're not coming back. This is about controlling the story for the audience that remains, because if they cannot control the ending, they can at least try to control how the ending is remembered by everyone watching. And the fourth stage, the one that happens quietly, almost invisibly, and often takes the longest to arrive, is when they finally attach themselves to someone new who is willing to hand them back the pen. This isn't healing. This is relocation. It's the search for a fresh page where they can once again be the author, where someone new hasn't yet learned the patterns, hasn't yet built up the resistance, hasn't yet closed a door on them before. And this is often mistaken, from the outside, as proof that they've moved on effortlessly, that the relationship truly meant nothing to them, that your pain over the situation was somehow disproportionate to their apparent ease. But moving quickly toward a new source of narrative control is not the same as processing what happened. It's often the opposite. It's avoidance wearing the costume of resilience. Here's what I want you to understand underneath all of this, because it's the part that actually matters for you, not for them. None of these four stages are things you need to manage, respond to, or fix. You are not responsible for helping a narcissist process the discomfort of an ending you were completely justified in choosing. Their disorientation is not a problem you created, and it is certainly not a problem you are obligated to solve. For years, maybe, you were trained to believe that their emotional state was your responsibility, that their comfort depended on your compliance, that any distress they experienced was somehow evidence that you had done something wrong. That training runs deep, and it doesn't disappear the moment the relationship ends. It often shows up loudest in exactly this moment, in the pull you might feel to respond to that soft, reflective message, to explain yourself one more time, to offer them the closure they've been asking for, because some old part of you still believes their peace matters more than your own. It doesn't. Not in this. Not anymore. The single most powerful thing you can offer yourself right now is the thing they cannot stand. An ending that simply holds. Not one you defend. Not one you re-explain. Not one you soften every time they perform enough remorse to make you doubt yourself. Just an ending. Final, quiet, and entirely outside their control. Because here's the truth about a narcissist forced to live with a decision they didn't make. The longer that decision holds, the more it teaches them something they have spent their entire life avoiding, which is that they are not, in fact, the main character in every story they appear in. Sometimes they're simply someone who used to be in yours. And that, more than any argument, any confrontation, any perfectly worded explanation you could ever give them, is the thing they genuinely cannot believe.